Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Phantogram, titled Voices. Now, if you've been watching some of my reviews for a while now, you've probably noticed that I don't tend to set indie rock on a pedestal. Now, there's a reason for that. There's good and bad stuff in any musical genre, and I don't particularly discriminate there. But I would be lying if I did say that my standards are different for certain genres of music. And there's a definite reason for that. Certain genres are trying to do different things, and thus they have a different focus, and thus you need to evaluate them on the basis of that focus. Most pop albums, for instance, they're only really trying to get you to dance and have a non-specific good time. And if the album does it well, it's succeeded in its goal. The album isn't going to get critical acclaim from me unless it goes above and beyond. But then again, that's what I'd say about any album from any genre. The difference here is that certain artists within certain genres, like indie rock or alternative country or progressive metal or certain branches of hip-hop, they've got bigger goals in mind. They're aiming higher. They're looking to make something more artistically significant than just dance track. And while it's very tempting to reward an act just for the ideas, it's the execution of the idea that really matters. That's why I've thrown some pretty harsh reviews at indie rock acts like The Neighborhood or Young the Giant, or hell, even acts that I've mostly liked in the vein of Lorde, Haim, or Bastille. I appreciate that these acts are aiming higher than to make just simple pop songs, believe me, but it's how they execute that vision that how I like to see, and that's eventually what I evaluate. It falls along the lines of a very central tenet of my musical philosophy, that genre is simply a descriptor of music, not a measurement of quality. And a transcendent album of any genre can be just as emotionally impacting or intellectually rewarding as, well, any other. So okay, what happens when you get a duo like Phantogram, who happens to toe the line between modern synth pop and the offbeat weirdness of some of their tour mates and collaborators, like the Flaming Lips? Well, that was a question I was looking to answer when I picked up their most recent album, Voices, albeit, I gotta admit, not expecting much. That wasn't to say that Phantogram's first album, Eyelid Movies, was bad. Far from it. It was enjoyable enough, but it wasn't a record that really stood out to me, so I was looking forward to getting reacquainted with the band and perhaps seeing if they've improved significantly. So how'd it go? The album's okay, I guess. Phantogram's Voices is far from a bad album, let me stress this, but in an increasingly crowded modern indie synth pop environment, it would be hard to say that Phantogram stands out among the rest of them. It's not a failure in terms of what the band was trying to create, though. Indeed, there's a fair bit going on underneath the surface of this album that does prove to be a welcome surprise, but I can't help but say I feel underwhelmed by this release, mostly because I don't really feel the band plays to their strengths as much as they should. So okay, first, let's talk about the vocals. Both Josh Carter and Sarah Barthel contribute vocals to this album, and juxtaposing Barthel's ethereal sultriness against the fuzzier, heavier electronic elements, it's an interesting contrast. But on the other hand, I'm not sure she has a lot of consistent emotional range. She does come across as having some real vulnerability on the ballad Bill Murray, but more often than not, she goes for Karen O's brand of sultriness that doesn't really fit the lyrical tone or the themes in which Phantogram is going. Josh Carter definitely gets second billing on this album, and for good reason. But while I think he's more tonally in line with the rest of the album in terms of the lyrics, he doesn't really stand out as a definite presence in the same way that Barthel does, mostly because the production tends to bury him further towards the back in the mix. But then again, maybe some of that has to do with the instrumentation as a whole, which is clattering and fuzz-saturated and filled with samples and odd keyboard effects almost to bursting. And while some of the classier samples do blend well with the attempts at grandeur that Phantogram makes, try and make their songs sound bigger and more imposing than they really are, most of them just come across as unfortunately extraneous and rather unnecessary. If this overproduction is what they gleaned with working with the Flaming Lips, it wasn't the right lesson to learn, mostly because it feels extraneous and distracts from the guitar melodies that are actually pretty damn solid in a sleigh bell sort of vein and have some good rougher texture, especially in the poppier standout track, The Day You Died. It doesn't help matters that the drums are as stiff and mechanical as they are, and never really having enough unique presence or enough unique drum breakdowns to stand out in the mix, which is already filled to the brim with glitchy synth effects, nearly omnipresent fuzz, and overloaded reverb that's intended to make tracks sound hollow and booming, but never really comes across all that potent, which keeps happening with indie rock acts. Guys, producers, you just can't pile on reverb and expect your songs to sound epic. You actually need to have some potent lyricism and presence behind it to make it work. And you know what, the frustrating fact is that most of these elements, they don't come together at all. The opening track, Nothing But Trouble, it has this guitar solo at the end of the track that kind of reminded me of the guitar solo in She's Moved On by Porcupine Tree, but it felt nowhere near as cohesive and just felt kind of messy. Now granted, I understand why they overloaded the mix with cacophonous fuzz and sound from every single angle while they tried to go for a little bit of a messier sound, because on a thematic level, this album is exploring the many voices playing in the head of somebody going through a breakup. It almost goes into depth about that inner psychosis. And lyrically, Phantogram do a pretty solid job exploring the various contributing emotions. Helplessness, anger, defiance, and denial. That fake smile you put on to reassure everyone that everything's okay when it's really not. And even that strange, inert feeling you get when you know that some of the feelings in the relationship have just sputtered out, and you know it's only a matter of time before you have to end it. On a very lyrical level, Phantogram really does do an in-depth job exploring those particular emotions, especially that last emotion that I described on The Day You Died, where the song is one of the rare ones that has just as much emotional weight when taken literally than on a deeper subtextual level. Sure, on a deeper level, it works as a song reflected in that strange, surprised, bemused feeling when you realize that all their feelings are gone from the relationship, but it also works on a bit of a more superficial level. The odd feeling you get when you go to a funeral expecting to feel grief and instead not feeling much at all, maybe because you've already grieved in your own way. And while Phantogram do repeat the dying as relationship ending metaphor a few more times to increasingly diminishing returns, especially on the final track, My Only Friend, I won't deny that on a lyrical level, there's some very simple, effective songwriting here that does work well. The problem really is in the execution, because none of the elements that I've described on this element feel on the same page. The production is heavy and cacophonous and completely drowns out the impact of the tighter guitar melodies. The lyrics have a decidedly pop sensibility when approaching darker subject matter, which is pretty much the standard modus operandi for indie pop. And Sarah Barthel's delivery feels bizarrely inert when delivering lyrics that really do require more desperation and force and rawness and emotional weight than she gives them. And you know what? I do think she's capable of delivering it. The earnest ballad Bill Murray, it proves that. And same with the end of Blackout Days. But the sultry, smoother vocal delivery, it just doesn't work as well on an emotional level with the lyrics. And it really doesn't match the tone brought by the production, which seems to be trying to show emotional distance, but never allows the tracks enough room to breathe or smolder enough to develop that distance. Maybe things could have worked a little bit better with the electric guitars more prominently in a Yeah Yeah Yeahs inspired groove, but I don't know, Phantogram never really gets there, and the pieces never add up to more than the whole. So in short, it's kind of telling that Phantogram's best songs on this album are when they're describing not really feeling much at all, because the emotional beats on this record only work for me really inconsistently. Honestly, I think they may have misunderstood their strengths, because while the heavier production and glitchier elements and vocal effects, they do add some texture to the mix, the melodies are so much stronger and the technical songwriting is a natural fit for a darker synth pop vibe. If they wanted to push those two elements together, they could, well, I'm not sure they'd be better than Churches, but they'd be close. And while I do like some of the songwriting and guitar lines, and really can't call any song on this record a serious bust or a bad song, Phantogram's voices never really rises into something that I would consider special. So, you know what? I'm inclined to give it a 6 out of 10 and a very tentative recommendation. There's definitely better synth pop and electronic out there. I mentioned a few of those acts, but if you're looking for a new fix, you could do a lot worse than Phantogram. So, what the hell, go check them out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to take a look at in 2014, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. So until then, see you next time.